and it will only record you if you are speaking. Otherwise, you will not show up on the recording. And I am going to turn it over to our first presenter this morning, Melissa Kazoil. Did I totally mangle that?
You did, but it's okay.
Okay, correct me. From Seattle King County Public Health, who's going to talk to us about COVID-19 vaccines for children and what we know.
Good
Thanks.
morning, everyone. My name is Melissa Koziel, and I go by Mel. So I am with the youth and young adults team for COVID-19 vaccines. So my team works primarily with 0 to 24 age range. And as we move close to this 5 to 11 authorization, we're just providing some information per request of Sarah after touching points. Hopefully I won't take too long today because I know your schedule is pretty packed. But I'm going to be presenting just a short slideshow just with some base information. And the hope is primarily it will be conversational. So if you have any questions to bring forward, maybe this PowerPoint will spark some interest. So I am going to share my screen here if technology allows me to do so. All right. Let's see. So to my knowledge, you should see a big screen that says, okay, vaccination for COVID-19. The beginning of the presentation is just going to go over some basic information about the vaccine, just so that we all have that baseline, which I'm sure you do because you're actively working with the community and the stuff probably feels like it's on auto repeat at this point. But currently there are 3 COVID-19 vaccines that are available in the United States, and that is the Moderna, the Pfizer, and the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccines. All 3 are safe and extremely effective against the disease. And you're still able to get COVID-19, but the main point of getting a vaccine is to fight against severe disease and lessen your chances of hospitalization and death. When you get the vaccine, you can expect some possible side effects for 1 to 2 days after getting the shot. And this could look different for every individual. But most of the time, it includes a sore arm, fatigue, headache, and a mild fever. The side effects often last for about 1 day, and that's just a sign that the vaccine is working. Your body is reacting to it. So obviously severe allergic reactions are very, very rare. But if you've had a serious reaction in the past, it's a good thing to just communicate with the provider who's giving you the vaccine, or even better, if you have the ability to communicate with a healthcare provider who knows your health history beforehand, they would be able to give you some vital information on the effect that the vaccine might have for you. One thing that I always say is this is really looking different for every individual after they get the shot. And I use a personal story of I'm an identical twin, but me and my identical twin both had reactions differently, side effects the day after we got the vaccine. So it really is just a personal situation, and it's how your body specifically reacts to getting the vaccine. So some common questions that we get with the vaccine that I'll run through quickly is that the vaccine cannot cause COVID-19. The strain of COVID-19 is not associated with the vaccine at all. So therefore, it is impossible to get the disease from the vaccine specifically. Some other common misconceptions that people tend to have is that there's obviously not a microchip in the vaccine. The vaccine does not contain any fetal tissue, and it does not contain any pork, animal byproduct, eggs, which are just common things that people may hear from their multiple sources of information. And then obviously, the vaccine does not contain any harmful metals or potential toxic ingredients. Some other common questions that we get specifically are, can pregnant and lactating people get the vaccine? Yes, it is 100% safe and effective for people who are pregnant. And then can you get the vaccine if you've already had COVID-19? Yes, it's actually more effective after you get the COVID-19 to also get the vaccine. Sometimes we hear about antibodies that is in effect after you have COVID-19, and that's what your body has organically made after fighting off COVID-19. But we are still unsure how long those antibodies are likely to stay in your system. So you are able to get the COVID-19 vaccine shortly after you recover fully from COVID-19. Some more common questions that we often get is, can the vaccine make you magnetic? And those are things like videos we've seen where people tend to put a magnet on their arm. And the answer is no. And does the COVID-19 vaccine affect my period or menstrual cycle? For some people, have reported temporary changes, but to be very clear, the vaccine does not affect fertility or someone's ability to get pregnant in the future. And things around pregnant people and fertility has been a primary question in recent um, time as we approach these 5 to 11 EUAs. So who can get the vaccine, which is ever changing right now. But right now, the COVID vaccine is free for anyone who is 12 and up. And this is regardless of someone's insurance, citizenship, or immigration status. So at any healthcare clinic, it is not necessary to have proof of insurance because the COVID-19 vaccine is 100% free. You do not have to show citizenship or immigration status. For the most part, when you go to a COVID-19 clinic, they might say, please have your insurance or photo ID ready. But if you go to the line and say, I'm sorry, I don't have my photo ID or insurance, the provider will respond and say that's 100% okay. We will still get you the vaccine today. It's just suggested if those things are available to individuals. So a provider cannot charge you for an office visit if you're only going to get the vaccine. And that is pretty critical, saying that pediatricians and primary caregivers will have the COVID-19 for youth. So as we move to youth and vaccines, the current EUA is available for 12 to 17-year-olds to get the Pfizer vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine only. So this is a 2-dose, 21 days apart. And this is the only vaccine that's currently eligible for those who are under the age of 18. People above the age of 18 are able to get Moderna and then Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson. As we move into this 5 to 11, which is kind of what's in the news right now, we are looking at early November at when it will be available for that 5 to 11 age group. And again, this is the Pfizer vaccine. So right now, what's currently happening at that national level is there are the Pfizer company put in the request of all the data that they have on the Pfizer vaccine for the 5 to 11-year-olds. And that request has to go through different systems and be approved by the FDA and the CDC before it is a first dose for a 5 to 11-year-old is administered in the US. Some things to know is it is a much lower dose. It's a third of the amount that a 12 and up year old person will be providing. So the kid dosage also provides the kid dosage also provides safe with similar few temporary side effects. So one thing to note that's pretty critical when we talked about the 5 to 11-year-olds is there's a completely different vial that they have for children aged 5 to 11. So as we approach the 5 to 11 EUA, providers who currently have 12 and up dosage won't be able just to pool 1/3 of their dosage. They have to go through the manufacturer and it has to be sent in a completely different vial. And this is just a safety measure to reduce the chances of a provider, reduce error I guess you could say. So the different vial will have a completely different dosage, and that is what's going to be tricky as we do this vaccine rollout, because just as we had some distribution hiccups with the first rollout of the vaccine, we're going to have to make sure that we are equitably distributing with the limited supply that we have in early November. There has been, we are aware at the national level that there will be enough doses for 5 to 11-year-olds in the entire country. But the allocation of those doses is just going to be a little slower as we approach this coming early November, because the manufacturers are just going to have to take their time to produce the right amount of doses each week. So, getting vaccinated for those who are under the age of 18 often includes a consent from an authorized adult. So, this primarily looks like a parent or guardian, but it's very much dependent on the provider. So, there is the ability, as we move the 5 to 11-year-olds, it's harder to have that mature minor determination that may have been spoken of before with the communities you serve, which is youth homelessness. But as we go further down to 5 and 11, it's obviously harder for that population to be defined as a mature minor. Um, Being in the position of being a liaison and working closely with youth, there is a potential for you to hold that authorization for youth. But again, it's very much dependent on the provider that's administering the doses. So if you're aware of a clinic where you want youth to get vaccinated and you know that their parent or guardian are unable to sign a consent for them, what I would do if possible is contact the organization that is hosting the clinic and ask them if they know if the provider is able to allow others who are not necessarily parent or guardian to sign off for the vaccine for the youth. So some common questions concluded in conclusion, and these are the ones that Sarah sent forward from your group specifically that I'll just run through. Some of them have been answered here, but it's never a bad thing to hear them again. When will children under the age 11 and under, be able to get the vaccine? So just to further explain, they believe the first dose of a youth to get vaccinated from 5 to 11 will be November 4th. And then from there, they will be prioritizing doses to pediatricians and primary caregivers, because we know from surveying parents that that's where they're most likely to get their children vaccinated. And then there will be supplemental options like clinics right at the elementary or middle school that the youth attends. So at the moment, there are clinics scheduled for almost every school district in King County. Other supplemental places to get the vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds would be those mass vaccination sites that were available for adults and those who were 12 and up, and pharmacies, and then also school-based health centers if their school-based health center is available for at the school that the child attends. Will they continue to administer the vaccine at schools as they did with older children with the parent permission signed and the medical aid on site in case? So yes, as I previously said, almost every school district in King County currently has events on the calendar to administer to 5 to 11-year-olds. At these sites, they will also be administering for older children as well. But a parent's permission is most likely required based off of that provider. And communicating with the schools of what that specific need is will be very important. The positive side is that for most, if not all, school clinics, they will have that consent form prior. So it could be printed or given to children and then signed beforehand, and so that the child can just bring it to the clinic and a parent doesn't have to necessarily be present. Um, So the next question is, will they be prioritizing 11 and under by those who have underlying medical conditions, similar to how they offered them to older people living in assisted living homes first? Um, so I'm interpreting they as the local government, which I guess technically is me with Public Health Seattle King County. And if there is needed for further clarification after I answer this, just go ahead and raise your hand. Um, so there's a lot of layers when it comes to allocating doses. There's that national level where they tell the state how much the state gets. And then the state goes based off of population to the local health jurisdictions, which is primarily the counties in the state. So right now, we're aware that King County will receive X amount of doses, and it's the job of public health to make sure that we're equitably distributing those doses while we have a limited amount. So not necessarily prioritizing underlying medical conditions, but we're looking at data and seeing where the highest rates of COVID-19 are and the lowest rates of vaccinated individuals are, and trying to prioritize. That looks often like South King County as to where the first doses may go. When we talk about primary caregivers and pediatricians getting those allocations, it's up to the individual providers to determine who they prioritize in that 5 to 11 age group. And there might be work happening in the county for those that have underlying medical conditions at a specific provider of operating a clinic specifically for those individuals. But at the public health level, that county level, rather than prioritizing those in assisted living homes or the comparable to 5 to 11-year-olds, we are just following the data because that age range is a lot smaller than when adults were approved firsthand. If that helps clarify that question specifically. So the last question here is, if a child is due for another immunization this year, should they hold off and get the COVID-19 vaccine first, or can they receive them all at once? So that is a very good question. You are allowed to get the COVID-19 vaccine at any time with any other immunization. And primarily what that will look like is with the seasonal flu vaccine, because that's most common this type of year. But we are also aware, because there was a lot of remote learning last year, that a lot of youth and young adults did not get their routine immunizations in time. So there is a collective effort with healthcare providers and schools to make sure that all children are up to date with immunizations and they are able to get the vaccine at the same time that they get any other immunization. So King County Public Health is a great resource, our website for vaccine updates. We have a youth and young adults page specifically, and there's also information provided in additional languages, and it is a very easy Google search. There's also information on vaccine rates, unvaccinated rates, COVID-19 cases, and a lot of unbiased, neutral, data-driven information that's just a good resource in case you have any questions or just need to reference it in the future. So that's my last PowerPoint specific slide. And I do believe I'm going a bit over, so I apologize. But I do want to leave the floor open or just give my information to Sarah so that if you do have any questions in the coming days, or if you're engaging with youth that have questions that you don't feel confident answering, that I am a resource to you as we move forward with the 5 to 11 authorization and the conversations just start to increase.
Great. Thank you very much, Mel. Would you mind dropping your information into the chat? And
Of
then
course.
we will also share it after the meeting for those that have questions. that they think of as they're working with families. Super helpful
Perfect.
information. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will probably drop off after I do give my information, but enjoy the rest of your training. And thank you all for the hard work that you do.
Great. Thank you very much. I am now going to turn it over to our executive director, Allison Eisinger, to talk to us about City of Seattle budget advocacy.
Thank you, Sarah. City and county budget, well, city and county advocacy, let's say, because we are not constricted to the city of Seattle, despite the fact that that is where there's a lot of activity right now. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I realize we are packing a lot into our half-hour general membership meeting this morning because there is such wonderful information coming our way through the Helping Homeless Students workshop, which we decided to tag on to this. Thank you so much, Sarah and Jody, for organizing this. I want to acknowledge that we're joined by Jody Rao. This is Jody's first full membership meeting as a new member of the coalition staff. And many of you know Jody from her previous position with the Healthcare for the Homeless Network. And we're delighted to have her join us, and you'll be hearing more from her in future meetings. And then also Maggie Malone, if you want to wave, Maggie, is also kindly stepping forward to help on a number of projects, including voter registration and voting rights. So Maggie and Jody are your folks to go to for that information, and maybe they can drop a little bit of info in the chat with links for those of you who may not have previously seen our You Don't Need a House to Be a Voter guide and information. And they're a wonderful resource to you to help ensure that everybody you're working with who's eligible can register and vote. As a quick reminder, the law changed. So even if people aren't registered to vote yet, there is still time to register and vote up until and on Election Day, which is coming up, which is very exciting. So we are in the middle of budget season. As a quick reminder, the way budgets work in both Seattle and King County is the executive, Seattle mayor, King County executive, proposes a budget. That has already happened. Those budgets are then transmitted to the legislative bodies, Seattle City Council, King County Council, and those bodies are then engaged in the process of making amendments, changes to those proposed budgets. In both cases, the tradition and the practice is that the final budget is approved on the Monday of the week that includes the Thanksgiving holiday. So it's really a very, very fast process. And this year, I would say even more compressed and of course, virtual. What does that mean for us as advocates and as service providers and as people who want to ensure that those who are currently without homes or shelter get their basic needs met and have a chance at housing? It means that we are super busy. And we are going to be sharing with you all and with folks on our email list information about specific advocacy that we'd like to encourage you to take. This morning, what I want to talk to you about is an extraordinary opportunity that we basically created. Some of you may have been part of the advocacy that we together, the Seattle King County Coalition on Homelessness, together with the Seattle Human Services Coalition, engaged in 3 years ago, led by us and in partnership with City Council member Teresa Mosqueda, to adjust human services contracts to keep up with inflation. What a concept. You know that you are not compensated adequately in most cases for the work that you are doing. And now certainly with inflation increasing, we are seeing that even though we succeeded in passing that important legislation and we won an inflation adjustment in law, which we think is really the first legislation like that in the country, even with that, the mayor's budget only includes a 3% inflation adjustment because of how it's calculated. But inflation is at 5.8%. So we worked with Councilmember Mosqueda again. Councilmember Herbold and Councilmember Strauss signed on to this. It is still a proposal, and we are advocating for an additional 2.8% inflation adjustment in this year. It's not enough, and we know that. I want to just acknowledge that. Keeping up with inflation is like the floor, and we are still committed to fighting and working with all of you to ensure that as essential workers who are doing essential work, that your work is valued and your work is respected, and that there is an understanding of what it takes to stay in these jobs and get better at them and develop relationships with people. So this is never going to be the end, but our first request for you, my first request for you, is to please, if you would, I'm just going to drop the emails in the chat box. Please send a note of thanks to these 3 Seattle City Council members, Teresa Mosqueda, who is the budget chair, Lisa Herbold, and Dan Strauss, thanking them for their advocacy and for their work to promote an additional 2.8% inflation adjustment for human services workers. We are going to need to talk to all 9 council members. So we will create an email template, and it'll be ready on Monday for you to use. So that's a quick task for you today. One of the things we like to try to do as a coalition is we advocate hard for the things that we need to be heard on. And we thank people when they've done really important work as lawmakers or decision makers. So thanking these 3 council members is a great way to start. And I think there's quite a bit of research about the practice of gratitude and what it does for our own well-being and in our physical and mental health. So think about that as a quick opportunity to thank some folks who are making decisions about hundreds of millions of dollars in the next few weeks. The next thing is Seattle is one piece of our coalition and King County is the whole of our coalition. And as you all know, we worked super hard to create the Health Through Housing initiative. And right now we're in a position of needing the King County Council and the Regional Policy Committee to approve the implementation plan for Health Through Housing. So Sarah just dropped into the chat a quick little advocacy link. Is that, there we go. Here's the take action link. Thanks, Sarah. And the Health Through Housing implementation plan is something that we agree with. We think that it is, broadly speaking, the direction we need to go in to provide housing and services for 1,600 people experiencing chronic homelessness or at risk of chronic homelessness in our community. It's really exciting to see these programs in former hotels and motels standing up. We just got word that the first few folks are going to be moving into one of the sites on October 28th, so next week. And things are going to grow from there, but only if we have an implementation plan that actually supports the vision. So no matter where you live in King County, you are represented by at least one and possibly more than one of the people who has decision-making power over this plan. So please use our action alert, add a personal message. It's always helpful for them to hear that you are a real person and not an automaton, and spread the word to your colleagues. There'll be more to come, and I'm just going to leave it at there. If you have questions for me about either of those, please put them in the chat. But we're going to let Sarah transition us to the workshop. Thank you, everybody.
Sorry, my mouse got stuck between my 2 screens. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Robbins with the Coalition on Homelessness. Thank you for those that joined us this morning for our very quick general membership meeting. I hope you can now all see my screen that has our agenda today for the Helping Homeless Students McKinney-Vento 101 workshop. And I am actually going to hand things over to our facilitator for this meeting, Kayla Blau, who is working with Building Changes. And she will start us off. Good morning, Kayla.
Morning. Good morning, everybody. Like Sarah said, my name is Kayla Blau. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a consultant with Building Changes. And I'm excited for everyone to be here this morning. I'll pass it over to Joey to kick us off.
Alrighty, sorry, multiple monitors and I lost the unmute button. Hey there, my name is Joey and I'm going to be doing the tech side of this. So welcome to our Helping Students Experiencing Homelessness Make an Evento 101 training. Gonna pass it to my coworker Sammy to introduce who we are as Building Changes, and then we can kind of jump around from there.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And we're coming from Building Changes, specifically our education strategy team. It includes Joy, Kayla as a consultant, myself, and then one more colleague who we hope will be able to introduce herself. We're having some tech issues. But again, happy to have you join us. We're excited to share this content with you today. If you don't know Building Changes or you haven't heard of us, we do a little bit of everything. It is good to know that it is a good thing to know that we aren't necessarily a direct service provider. We often show up in capacity of, grant making. We also work at the intersection of housing, education, and health. I have been at Building Changes for 2 years now, but used to receive grants from Building Changes back in the day when I worked for a housing nonprofit. So what we would love to cover with you today are just some great information about students experiencing homelessness, what we know, what our data tells us, and what you've heard before is prior to COVID, we were seeing about 42,000 plus students experiencing homelessness across Washington state. I know that a lot of you are housing advocates, youth advocates, family advocates, and what we know is that when specifically McKinney-Vento students are experiencing homelessness, they don't always qualify for streamlined services through HUD programs. So what we're here today is to just teach you a little bit more about that program, what it looks like. We're going to hear from some liaisons and some advocates in the community. And again, we're just happy to have you here today.
All right, I think I saw Marette pop in. So Marette, if you are here and able, if you want to just say a quick hello so they can see your face as well. Marette's going to be helping us in the chat.
Good morning, happy Thursday. And like Joey said, I'll be behind the scenes, but I'm here if you have any questions, and I'll be in the chat box as well.
Thanks, Marette. So before we begin, I know a lot of you have been here since the beginning of the meeting, so there was an opportunity to put your name in the chat and kind of your organization, but we're going to ask if you are new, or even if you already said it. I saw some new folks enter the room, so if you could just pop your name, your pronouns, and your organization in the chat, helps everyone get a feel for who they're in the room with, or the Zoom room. As well as I do want to do a quick land acknowledgement. So we would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. So there are 2 links in the chat from Marette. One is for Real Rent Duwamish. So this is the way that you can support the Duwamish tribe with Real Rent, as well as nativeland.ca. I know we're all King County based, but this is a great tool to see whose land you are on if you are in a different space. And then some quick housekeeping. We're going to try, it's a pretty big group today, so we're going to try and keep our questions in the chat. You are welcome to raise your hand during the Q&A portion, and we'll have people unmute then. And definitely feel free to use the reactions. So we love claps, hearts, anything, if something's resonating with you, please feel free to throw a little reaction up there. Alrighty. So I'm gonna switch us over to a Mentimeter real quick. So can everyone see this code up here, the menti.com 45330520? So would love it if folks could head on over. Marette also put the link in the chat. And we're hoping to just see how people are feeling about the school year. We understand not everyone is working in schools directly, but it is the beginning of a new school year, and especially thinking about COVID these past 18 months and how this is really the first year in a little bit that students are really at school. A mix of emotions already, wary and hopeful, nervous, confused. We are too. I think everyone is. Positive, yeah. Daunted, it's also a lot going on. It's hard to read as it moves, but it is also kind of fun. Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of kind of both emotions here. This is a combination of like, we're excited about this school year, students are back in buildings, and also that comes with a lot of unknowns and a lot of stress for everyone. So just want to name that and thank everyone for their hard work in supporting students as they're back in school. We'll give this one another minute and then I'll click back. BC team, if you have any other thoughts, feel free to hop in whenever. Yep, still seeing that kind of combination of feelings here. All right, I'm gonna pop back. Feel free to continue to add to that as you think of things. I can download the results later and we can look at them. I can send them out to Sarah if you would like to see. Now I'm gonna pass it off to Kayla.
Thank you, Joey. Okay, so for this training, we're hoping that by the end of the training, then we will, you will all be able to identify who's considered homeless under the McKinney-Vento Act and how students can access services and how you can troubleshoot issues that pop up as students and families are navigating the housing system, the education system, and how those two intersect, how their rights are. Yes, we will get access to the PowerPoint and the recording after the session. And yeah, so I also want to just invite anyone that I recognize a lot of the advocates in the Zoom room. I worked at a domestic violence agency in Seattle for many years and at Seattle Public Schools, McKinney-Vento. And so I know a lot of advocates in the room have a wealth of experience and knowledge as well. So feel free to pop in the chat or, the raise your hand feature, like Joey mentioned, hoping to make this as interactive as possible. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the McKinney-Vento program, it's a federal law and it's only been around since the late 80s, 1987, I believe. So a big part of this training is hoping to spread awareness, not just for your work as housing advocates and education advocates, youth advocates, but to also share with your community. Even if you don't know anyone that is experiencing homelessness, you might know someone who knows someone, and even having access to the understanding of the program can really help people through that process and help alleviate some of the trauma associated with it. So the program was designed to protect the educational rights of students experiencing homelessness from preschool all the way up to the end of K through 12 education. It also includes protecting the rights of unaccompanied youth. So oftentimes that will be a student in high school that is on their own, sleeping either in shelters or abandoned warehouses, tent cities, things like that. But unaccompanied youth can also include any age of student who is not living with their biological parents without a legal agreement. So it's really just created to have laws that protect the school access and school stability for students experiencing homelessness. And so some of those rights is immediate enrollment. Oftentimes, we would see a lot at the domestic violence shelter if a family fled violence and then they were in a new district and wanted to enroll their child, they would, if the receiving school was not aware of McKinney-Vento, which unfortunately a lot of school staff aren't aware of it, then they would turn students away because they didn't have birth certificates or immunizations or things like that with them. As we know, working, as advocates that work with folks experiencing homelessness, oftentimes those things get lost in the shuffle, especially if you're fleeing violence. And so that's part of the rights that are protected, is that shouldn't hold up a student from accessing their education. They should be immediately enrolled in the school, and then those immunizations and birth certificates and things like that can be acquired later. It also protects the rights to attend the school of origin, which we'll cover in a little bit, and the right to transportation to and from their school of origin. So even if they are living in a shelter in Seattle, but go to school in Shoreline, those two districts would work together to get transportation provided for that student. And they should be able to participate in the same activities as other students. So a lot of times, there might be a $10 fee associated with field trips, things like that. Those would be waived under the McKinney-Vento Act for students experiencing homelessness, so that they can fully access their education and all of the activities that come with that. They also have a right to the dispute resolution process. Especially, this gets really tricky with school election and enrollment. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of misunderstandings about the McKinney-Vento laws and what rights are protected for students experiencing homelessness. So there's a specific dispute resolution process that we'll go over later. Should you have any issues accessing services for students or accessing transportation for them.
Thanks, Kayla. So just also know we have a ton of content to cover. So I know you all will be getting the slides, but we're going to go into eligibility. And another thing I think we're sharing is, as Kayla had mentioned, it's great to see familiar faces. I actually come from the Tacoma area. I was a liaison for 2 years. Prior to that, I was in housing services of all kinds for about 8 years. And have a lot of passion for this particular intersection. So as we go into this, we want to think about eligibility always, but there is some space to understand McKinney-Vento. A lot of the things are interpreted differently, but what we want to give you today is some really basic pieces to remember. So children and youth who lack those 3 words: fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. I'm sure you all can imagine how many different directions you can go with that definition, but that is one of the base pieces to McKinney-Vento. What this often looks like is sharing housing due to economic hardship. That could be living with grandma, that could be living with a friend, that could be living temporarily anywhere with another household where you don't have that security and safety of a lease agreement. McKinney-Vento shows up in communities anywhere from 2/3 to 75% doubled up. As I already kind of mentioned, this gets tricky when we start to navigate housing services, because what you're not going to see is some of the programs aren't able to serve this population. The reason why we care about that is because what we know through our research is that students that are living doubled up have equally poor academic outcomes as their unsheltered peers. So if we think about putting those two kind of definitions together and that misalignment that exists, if our investment is in the future of students, it's really, really important to advocate for housing stability. So again, the kind of lower bullets really kind of riff on that HUD language in a way. They do share some things like living in, well, I guess let's not get too technical. I guess if you live in a hotel and you're paying for it, you wouldn't qualify under HUD. But living in hotel, motel, just places that don't have adequate accommodations, basically. Emergency or transitional shelters. Transitional is a tricky word out there. I remember being a liaison and consistently struggling with kind of advocating for families that were living in transitional spaces. So, and then public-private place, not meant for habitation would be the HUD side, but not regularly used, or again, missing those accommodations. Next slide, please. And then this is just kind of another way to understand if you're working with a family, how they could or couldn't be deemed eligible. So children lacking, again, that fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence. We break down those terms even further. So fixed is really just think permanent. You know, if you're living at grandma's house, but you don't have a lease there, or you don't have anything that binds you to that address, it means that you could be considered housing unstable, even if it is kind of another family member. Or it could be, again, like somebody that you're just doubling up with temporarily. Regular, just think about that routine. You know, is this a place where you can wake up comfortable and safe, and you know that you are able to get to and from school, somebody's going to be there. Just think about like really that routine, predictable cycle that we like to be in to help us, you know, feel like we're able and comfortable to plug into school and learn. Adequate, that's a really tricky one also, but sufficient for meeting both physical and psychological needs. Typically met in home environments. So just kind of think about home environments. And then when we combine all of those together, can the student go there every night to sleep in safe and sufficient space? So that's just a really good way to frame McKinney-Vento, and you know, the little icons help too. Next slide.
Sorry, we have a question in the chat about what about 2 weeks from literal homelessness? And that is Mike E., Lake Forest Park Citizens Commission.
Good morning, Mike D. So I would say, like, when I was in a liaison position, it's not as simple to just answer that question yes or no. So you would really want to meet with the family or the student or the youth and really get a full understanding of what's going on. So you'd want to know, I mean, they could be 2 weeks from losing their place, but they could have no power, which would make it not safe for habitation. So you really want to think about meeting the needs of that household as you come across them. As a general practice, I would say when I was advocating for a household, anything that made me feel like would be helpful to really avoid as much trauma in that crisis as possible, I would work from that lens. There's nothing in the statute that says like do work from a prevention lens. So when I say like there's a lot of kind of wiggle room in McKinney-Vento, there really is. A lot of it is up to interpretation. So thanks for asking that question, because it's good to get a sense of like, this person is about to experience homelessness. What can we do to get ahead of it? So depending on their situation, I would lean towards wanting to, have a conversation and trying to make them eligible. From a housing perspective, it would look like partnering with the school liaison to make sure. What I can't say is that if you walk in and say this person's going to lose their house in a month or 2 weeks, you are not guaranteed, yes, you're eligible for McKinney-Vento. So I know that wasn't clear, but I think that that's what we'll learn. That's kind of how McKinney-Vento shows up in some ways. So I don't know, hopefully that answers at least part of your question in some way.
It was more a reference to diversion funds that are available for youth that are 2 weeks from homelessness versus waiting till they're literally homeless.
Okay. That's kind of got layers too, Mike. So I would just say, like, as a safe cover, and we can definitely get into this more later, but as a safe place to land, just know that, like, start with that person, like keep it centered on the person, the student, the family, and their situation, and then advocate from there. That's kind of the framework that works, that seemed to work best in terms of making sure families are getting their needs met. But yeah, I don't want to cut you off, but I do want to keep going, and we can kind of circle back to that later. But thank you. So homeless and accompanied youth. So youth who meets the definition of homeless, they're not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. So liaisons will help unaccompanied youth choose and enroll in school. They do a variety of different things. We'll get into that later as well. But also it's good to be mindful of the specific needs of runaway and homeless youth. So this is another area where This can be any age student as well. So what we typically think is like, oh, we need to focus on high schools. That's not exactly true. Middle schools are really a place where we know that this is happening, but there isn't as much awareness because we just kind of think, oh, it must be affecting, you know, older students, but this does show up in middle school. This can show up in elementary school as well. There are a lot of like intersections of homeless unaccompanied youth because sometimes it also kind of crosses over with students in foster care and different systems like that. So that's something to be made aware of. But again, if we are wanting to really, if we're showing up as advocates, if you hear that that person is not in physical custody of a parent or guardian, I would immediately make them eligible for services as an unaccompanied youth. And I think we're gonna go back to Kayla now.
Thanks, Sammy. So I am just going to fly through this one because we're a little short on time, and I want to make sure we have time for our McKinney-Vento liaisons so you can hear directly from them about what the work looks like on the ground. But under the federal mandate of the McKinney-Vento Act, then every school district has the duty to designate a homeless liaison. Oftentimes, every school building as well will have a point of contact that communicates directly with that liaison about the students that are experiencing homelessness in their school. Like we talked about before, the homeless liaison is there to ensure that every student experiencing homelessness can immediately enroll and have access to services, remove barriers and update policies. As we've seen, you know, COVID-19 has changed a lot of things, and it's no different for students experiencing homelessness and trying to access their education, you know, remotely last year, and now returning to the school this year and having issues with transportation. So as you know, the world changes, then it's up to the liaisons to keep up with it, and that's no small job. So we'll hear a bit more about that in a few minutes. And so the school of origin that I mentioned earlier is one of the rights that are protected just so that the student will have continuity in their education, meaning if they were evicted out of an apartment in Renton and then they moved to a shelter in Shoreline, they have the choice to either continue at their school in Renton so they don't have to switch in the middle of the school year, and that would be considered their school of origin, or they could switch to the school closer to where they will be staying. But under the McKinney-Vento Act, they would have a right to continue at that school. And the school selection should be based on the child's best interest. So sometimes, you know, if we have a student that came from Shelton or Tacoma, and then they would be getting transported to Shoreline or something like that, and they're 5 years old and going in a taxi, that might not be the best route for that student. So it's up to the liaison to partner with the family and the student and figure out what is in the best interest of the child.
So, sorry, continuing with that. There we go. Uh-oh. I'm sure, uh-oh. We are at, there we go. I was like, I got thrown off for a second. Sorry about that. So this is under the presumption that keeping the student in their school of origin is in the student's best interest. Again, this really just focuses on the household, the student, what their needs are, kind of where they're coming from, what the transportation could look like, their age. There's all these different factors. But again, specific ones that we've highlighted: impact of mobility on achievement, education, health, safety, and school placement of siblings. These situations can sometimes be fairly complex to figure out. So especially when you bring in siblings, but yeah, just really thinking about the student situation and what would be kind of the best, not easiest necessarily, but like what would make the most sense for where they're at that time. Next slide, please. So immediate enrollment, that includes attending classes online, classes in person, just being able to fully engage in activities at school. McKinney-Vento doesn't define immediate, but it's without delay. So basically, if a student walks in and says, I'd like to enroll today, and is with their parents or something, and they're like, well, you don't have this piece of paper, this record that we need, you cannot deny access to school for a McKinney-Vento student. The whole point is to stabilize them in school, and we are not supposed to the school is not to act as a barrier to their enrollment in any way. So if you ever feel pushback, that would be something to fall back on, knowing that their students' rights, part of that piece is immediate enrollment. Next slide. So again, just kind of pushing that further. Entitled to immediate enrollment, any public school that students living in the same attendance area are eligible to attend. Even if the student does not have required docs, which we already mentioned, they can't be turned away for any outstanding fees, maybe from another school, or if they have missed application or enrollment deadlines. So basically those kind of big pieces that we know are required at the front door of school, McKinney-Vento, if they're qualifying for McKinney-Vento or eligible for those services, that will not stand in their way from starting school. We're going to go back to Kayla.
Thank you. I was just trying to answer the question in the chat real quick. That was a great question. We'll hear more about it from the liaisons in a second. But usually the school district doesn't have funds allocated to help directly with housing, but some districts have grants or partnerships with nonprofits to aid in that process. But more often than not, then it will be referrals to other CBOs, community-based organizations, to support with those housing. Okay, so enrollment. Like I mentioned earlier, it also applies to preschools and students, like siblings of school age children. And some preschools, especially like Head Start programs, may have allocated spots for students experiencing homelessness, or they will have them, bumped up on the wait list. But it's up to the enrolling school, not necessarily the student or person experiencing homelessness, to obtain school records from the previous school that they attended and immediately refer the parent to the local liaison. So that's why it's so important to spread awareness about the McKinney-Vento Act, because oftentimes, if you're walking into school, it might be like the receptionist or front desk person, and if they are not aware of the rights or that this program exists, then that delays the students' access to education and to these services. Transportation. I'm sure this will be a hot topic later on, because as we all know, this has been a big struggle this year as we return to school after the COVID-19 lockdowns, because we just lost so many school bus drivers. And so it's been really tight for a lot of districts. But even so, they have rights under McKinney-Vento Act to get transportation to and from school, from the shelter or wherever they're staying. It could be a nighttime residence that might be different than the shelter. But either way, it should begin without delay. And it's not necessarily always going to be a yellow school bus. I think on the next slide, it has some, yeah. So sometimes for middle school or high school students, it'll be like an ORCA card in Seattle or a transit pass, so they can take the bus to school when that's appropriate or safe for the family. A lot of times, especially this year, due to the shortage of bus drivers, then there's something called in lieu of agreements, where the families can receive gas reimbursements. When I was working with McKinney-Vento, sometimes that would even be, well, in one instance, it was a school staff member who lived close by to the student in Federal Way, and his parents were working and were not available to drive him. So she was the one that was able to drive him to and from school and receive that in lieu of gas reimbursement. We've also seen districts getting really creative, getting Uber gift cards or gas vouchers, things like that, so families can immediately have something in hand to not delay their students' access to school.
So you might, I'm trying to think back at Tacoma, how many times we kind of handled or walked through this dispute resolution process. But there's a dispute resolution process that exists. If the household or student feels like they are not kind of not being heard, not getting to basically, I don't know, I'm sorry that I'm tripping right now. But basically, like if I wanted to go to this school and the liaison got in my way and it was becoming an issue and they really weren't hearing like my best interests, and there was kind of this conflict that developed, there's a dispute resolution process through every school district. It should be able to be accessed through their like district page. Usually it's connected to the McKinney-Vento services or where you would go to see that. If that happens, so if a dispute is to be made against or requested against the district or the McKinney-Vento liaison, what that means is that student will be immediately enrolled in the school, which enrollment is sought. So a lot of times, say the student will come in and say, I want to go to this school, and the liaison will say, I don't know if that's in the best interest, and there might be some back and forth. So the dispute defaults to the person's request, if that makes sense. So that would mean that even if there was some disagreement or maybe the transportation or, there were some issues involved in that decision, it would mean that it defaulted immediately to that family's requested need. The liaison shall ensure unaccompanied youth are immediately enrolled pending resolution of the dispute. So during that time when the dispute's being handled, that student will still have full access to what their initial request was. Please also know that this has to do with eligibility, school selection, and enrollment specifically. And then the parent, guardian, youth must be referred to the liaison who would carry out the dispute resolution process. So usually that just looks like, speaking to the district liaison and going kind of back and forth around kind of what the needs are and then figuring that out. They want that to move as soon as possible, but sometimes I've seen that take, multiple days. But the idea is to just be able to advocate for yourself. As a housing provider, it's perfectly great to accompany a household or student in that process in case they're needing any additional support. Then next slide. Sorry for the background noise. So we're going to do a quick little part about as it applies to health and COVID-19. Unfortunately, I logged in just as the Department of Health was concluding their pieces, so I will own that part. But next slide. But what we have to say and share about COVID-19 is one of the abilities for a McKinney-Vento liaison is they're able to provide consent on behalf of unaccompanied youth. Sorry, next slide. So when we think about this in context of where we're at, how are McKinney-Vento liaisons able to help young people experiencing homelessness fight COVID-19? So we just have 2 slides on this part, but and there's more information in this link, and we will be sending out these slides. But basically what we want you all to know is that McKinney-Vento liaisons, school nurses, and school guidance counselors are able to provide informed consent for certain types of healthcare for this specific population, and that includes immunizations. So while consent from parent or guardian is often required for decisions like this, if the youth is unaccompanied, the liaison and those other support staff are able to stand in on behalf of that young person. Next slide, please. And then ways you can support McKinney-Vento liaisons and students' access. I think these are just kind of like reminders. I think that this group, for the most part, probably works actively with students and families, but it's always good to show that you are aware of the other side of those school resources, like the McKinney-Vento liaison's ability to provide consent. There's also some links that will show you that form through OSPI's website. Next slide. So now we're a little bit behind, but we're happy that we made it. We're welcoming our partners, McKinney-Vento liaisons, Janae Proctor-Mills from Seattle Public Schools, as well as Julie Hurt from Tukwila School District. We were planning on having Marianne join us, but I think that we just have Julia and Janaea for today. So next slide. What we're going to do is just kind of run through these 3 questions, and Julia and Janaea are going to answer from their districts. We'd love to highlight just how different this work looks in different communities, and we're so happy they're able to join us so you all can get a feel for what McKinney-Vento looks like as it plays out every day in our districts. So if you both or either of you could just share an example of how you're currently partnering with a housing provider or CBO.
Okay, I'll go. So we are a tiny district. We're Tukwila. We have 5 schools. We have 3 elementaries and 1 middle school, 1 high school. One of our academic strategies is meeting students and families' basic needs for those that qualify for the McKinney-Vento program, be that food, clothing, shelter, housing, whatever they might need. We know that when students are secure in where they're going to be that night, and if they have food on the table, that they can concentrate on their academics. And so we partner with a lot of our local organizations. We partner with the Riverton Park United Methodist Church. They have our food pantry. They also are doing care right now. Care stands for clothes are really expensive. And so our families can go there, they can get clothing, they can get items, hygiene items, stuff that they might need, coats, shoes, that type of thing. And also they have a shelter there. And then we partner with Neighborhood House, who has been amazing. We're one of the few districts that are part of the Student Family Stability Initiative. And so what we're able to do is we're able to refer our families over there. It's funded by King County Housing Authority and managed by Neighborhood House. And they're able to help our families with employment, money management, and getting permanent housing. We also work with our Best Starts for Kids programs, and we're working with community organizations that that have funds for emergency prevention and rent assistance programs. We work with Health Points for immunizations. And then we work with the Tukwila Community Center to also give families what they might need around the winter break or around the holidays. And we always tell our families, because we have such a huge diverse district, that you don't have to celebrate Christmas or that to take part in Spirit of Giving. It's just a time that you can get what you need for your families. And so we do that once a year with our CBOs. We also work with Maverick Cares to get food for our winter breaks and other holidays that are there. We have providers meetings like monthly, and so that helps connect us with our providers that are in the area and know what's new, what's going on. It also helps give them information on what's going on with our school district and our families. And then there's network time during that too. So we are going to be starting those again in December monthly. One of the things that when I say an academic strategy, I just want to use an example. Like I had a family that was really had a negative attitude towards the district, towards the school, and they were on our McKinney-Vento qualification list. And so I sat down and talked with the family to find out, what was going on, what I could do to assist them. We work really hard on getting flexible funding so that we can do some assistance with electricity and housing deposits, that type of thing. But that's just recently in the last couple of years that we've been able to do that. And it's very limited. We can't use school funding that comes directly from the state for that. So with this particular family, they were really struggling. They had a huge electric bill. They were getting ready to have their electricity shut off. They didn't feel like the school was very supportive in helping them and it kind of spilled over to like academics, and there were some behavior issues, attendance issues, academics, and so after sitting down and talking with this family, I was able to work with our community providers and our flexible funding and help them keep their electricity on, and that totally turned around the whole attitude for the family. For the students we noticed that they had increased attendance. We noticed that their academics were better. We noticed there was less disruption in class, and they were able to, parents would come down to the school if we had any questions or any concerns. And so they were just really, it helps a whole lot. And that's just one example. A lot of our families are not, they're doubled up. So we have 75% of our families are doubled up, which means that they're living with another family. And so this also can be really a tricky situation for those families. They can be asked to leave at any time. There's no, they have no security that they're going to be able to stay there that night. And also they don't, like, where can their kids do their homework? What's acceptable in the household, what's not? It's you're combining different households. So that is a really tricky situation and very stressful for families that are in that situation. So the one thing that I think that the best thing to do is to get the information out there to our community. Our community, I think that the more people that know about McKinney-Vento and the rights and what we can offer the families to break down those educational barriers, the better. So that if they, you see somebody out in the community and you're a friend and they're going through a hard time, you can spread that knowledge throughout our community. And so I feel like that's the big thing, is getting the message out there and breaking the stigma of homelessness, because homelessness looks different. It looks different for every family. So so I think that is a huge way that the community can support. And also talking to the legislature about increasing, we have a lack of shelters. We have a lack of affordable housing. Our families, it's hard for families to get out of that homelessness when everything's so expensive rent wise, and they have nowhere to stay. Their shelters are full. That information to get that out to the city and the legislatures and the people that make the big decisions on those. And then the one thing I think I would like the CVOs to know is that the schools have become like a wraparound service, because the trend for nationally is to help with basic needs first. Families come to us when they need food, they need clothing, they need any of those basic needs. So we spend a lot of time working with our families trying to get them in a stable place where their kids can be successful, and we become a huge wraparound service for that. And so when families are quarantined because of COVID, we've gone to the food pantry and taken food out to families. We've gone and purchased Clorox wipes, hygiene items, hand sanitizer, and brought it out to their family. So so those definitely are things that we're able to do. Another thing that is that a flexible funding, I think right now it seems like we always wait. Our hands are tied with our funding until the family loses their housing completely. Well, we can prevent a lot of this by having that flexible funding out in the community, or with our district being as small as it is, we're able to, if we get flexible funding, we're able to put that out to families that really need it. Especially if they're affected by COVID during that time, we were able to use that flexible funding to prevent them from falling behind on their rent. Because once a family qualifies for the McKinney-Vento program, they already have a court-ordered eviction. So that means that before COVID, that meant that within a couple days, you could have a sheriff at your house telling you, escorting you out. And it was happening really fast. And so we were able to help families a little bit with that if we have flexible funding, and that avoids the trauma of them having to be homeless in the first place. So.
Julie, thanks so much. That was a ton of awesome information. We're going to hand it over to Janaea from Seattle Public Schools. So Julie was able to kind of get through all of those. So Janaea's just kind of going to give her perspective of these 3 questions as well. And then we'll move on to our next speakers after that, our community advocates.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. I won't waste any time. I'll just go ahead and get into it. Seattle Public Schools partners with a huge amount of community-based organizations. Most importantly, we partner with the shelters and housing programs that we have locally. So that being the YWCA Student Stability Program, which is specifically for Seattle Public School students and families. Through this program, families can get direct access to a housing program. We have called them 2 hours before school is over, asking about families, and we were able to get families into hotels for the night and then get access to services directly following. We also partner with our shelters. Our shelters have a partnership where they can submit transportation requests to us, submit financial requests if we have the resources at the time, without having to work with the family per se. So they're kind of the liaison between us and the family because they have so many different families accessing their shelters. We also partner with other community-based organizations for food bank support. Some of our family support specialists will pick up food for the families weekly. We partner with some of the churches so that they can provide food to the families. Additionally, we will partner with organizations like the Alliance for Education for yearly flexible funding for our schools. Thankfully, we are so thankful for that partnership because schools can easily access some funds if they need it. Those funds do run out. We have about, I want to say we have like 107 schools. Don't quote me, but we have upwards of 100 schools at Seattle Public Schools. So the district is huge. Of those schools, we have about I think 2,200 McKinney-Vento students in the district. So it's really important for us to partner with the community-based organizations because you all have some of the resources that our families can benefit from. And honestly, if I haven't made your acquaintance, I'll put my email in the chat. I welcome all of you to reach out to me, especially if you are working with families in Seattle Public Schools, because we would love to see how we can support the work you do, and you support the work that we do. So going into the second question, that kind of falls in line with my last sentence. It's really important for us to cultivate the relationships that we have with the community. So if you do know that you can support families within the Seattle Public Schools, reach out. Our email is mkb@seattleschools.org. And I will put my personal email in there. It's like I said, it's really important for me to communicate with you all and partner with you all so that you all can, have access to some of the families we serve in the most safest HIPAA way possible. So the main thing is spreading the word. If you know of families that can access the program that we have, the McKinney-Vento program is for families who are homeless. And like Julie said, homeless can look a lot of different ways, specifically for African-American families. Those families don't even know that being doubled up, living in your grandma's house or living in your auntie's house because you don't have a place to stay. They don't even know that that is a form of homelessness. And they can be accessing resources. I have some of my closest family, and I was telling them, "Hey, you qualify for the program that I'm working in," and they're like, "No, I don't. Like, I have a job." Yeah, you have a job, but you don't have housing, right? And so it can look a lot of different ways. So if you feel like a family could qualify for the program, reach out to us and say, hey, this is this family situation. Do they qualify for this program? And if they don't, can you refer us to some resources? One thing I definitely wish all CBOs knew at this time is that transportation is a huge, 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 huge issue. I put emphasis on huge again. You know, all districts around the entire country are being impacted by transportation delays because of the federal mandate. And specifically in Seattle, we lost 142 buses this last Monday. And so that's a huge hit. That's not only McKinney-Vento families, that is kids that, you know, have never had a problem with transportation and have never had housing issues. And so if you know of resources that can benefit the schools for transportation, reach out, you know, let us know. We want to do our best to get all the kids to school. But honestly, this federal mandate is a huge I would say it's unforeseen because there isn't a lot of stuff you can do to, you know, help it. The only thing we really can do is to make sure that we're connected with resources like Zoom, Hop, Skip, Drive. However, with the amount of students that we have coming outside of the district into the district, Hop, Skip, Drive is proving to be a huge challenge because McKinney-Vento students have access to their school of origin as long as it is in their best interest. And for many of our students, they are, it is in their best interest because they don't plan to stay out of the district. They want to come back home when their, you know, funds permit. And so transportation is a really huge issue. We're accessing all the resources that we have available in order to serve our families. But, you know, I ask for all of our community-based organizations to practice just a little bit of patience and care because our transportation department is working 24 hours a day. Someone is always in that office trying to get families into, you know, into transportation and into school. We don't know what, you know, what tomorrow is going to look like or what the next day is going to look like, but we're trying our best to make sure that, you know, our most vulnerable populations are getting the support and resources that they need in order to attend school. And so with that being said, that is my big spiel. And thank you so much for allowing me to be a part. I will put my personal email in the chat as well.
Thanks, Janaea. Sorry about that. So if we have like a couple, we have about 5 minutes. If we have a couple really quick questions for Janaea or Julie, type in the chat or, you know, raise your hand. We also have more time for a Q&A after our two next speakers. Okay, I think everyone's just absorbing all the information. There's nothing's lighting up, so we're gonna go back.
Oh, there is one question I saw. And it says, can you tell us how to help families get in lieu of reimbursement? We have families who have lost transportation due to the driver shortage and the cost of gas is going up in their school. So cost of gas to go to their school has become a cost prohibitive. So at Seattle Public Schools, our transportation department is offering in lieu of reimbursement. How you would get that is to, for one, make sure that the family has completed a student housing questionnaire and is accessing our resources. And from there, we have family support specialists that are assigned to all the schools. These family support specialists can be found on the website as well. And I'll put the link in there, but families can just, well, for one, they would have to submit a transportation request. After that, because they're waiting for transportation, they would get that in lieu form. and it will be submitted from there. We do our best to get families on Orca, and get them other means of transportation, not only just the bus, but what works best, what's feasible, and what is safest for them. So honestly, at the district, I don't know how safe it is for a fourth grader to be riding Orca, but we do what is feasible and what works for the families. But also what's within our transportation policy. So they would get that reimbursement through our office, and then additionally, we have been offering some gift cards for gas when we have them. Resources are really scarce, so it can be a little bit of a long shot, but we do try to offer that in addition to, because they need gas right now to get to school. So that's my response to that question. Maybe Julie will chime in.
Yeah, so like I said, Techwell is a lot smaller. So when it comes to the school contact, I'm the school contact for all 3 elementary schools, and I rotate through those buildings. So families, all they would have to do is talk to the office at that school, and then that office can refer them into me. When I qualify a family for McKinney-Vento, I go through and ask them, if they would like to have tutoring, if they need transportation, so I ask them a bunch of different things, what services they need. And one of the first things I ask them is whether they want to do in lieu of, or they want me to send up transportation. And then I explain to them what in lieu of is. With our driver shortage, we've done that for a while, but just as a routine screening question, if parents pick in lieu of, it makes it a lot easier for us. And families that can't, there is a lag time for that to become, because they have to turn in after the fact every month. But we do have some funding that's come with our American Rescue Plan funds, and with our flexible funding, where we're able to purchase some gas cards to get families started with that process. So.
Thank you so much, both Julie and Janaea. I know that y'all both work magic on the daily. You have extremely hard jobs and do them very well. So I just really want to thank you for taking the time to come and share your knowledge this morning, and to hopefully, develop some connections with some of the advocates in our community. I also wanted to just lift up something that was said privately in the chat I remember being at the shelter, being really frustrated when I would send a transportation request and not hear back for 2 or 3 days. And then once I transitioned to Seattle Public Schools, to the McKinney-Vento office, and we had over 4,000 students experiencing homelessness in our district that we were coordinating services for, I was like, okay, now I understand. But I remember that anger of just like, why aren't they responding? So please have grace with your liaisons. They are doing so much. They're working so hard, and they're really doing the best they can. So just have grace and patience with them, and recognize that, we're all here to serve our students and get them the resources that they need, and to just, be a squeaky wheel, but with kindness and patience, because it's a big job. So thank you again to you both.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I think at this point, we'll transition to our advocate panel. We'll start with Joanna Tarr, who's been a children's advocate for over 20 years at a local domestic violence agency, to share some of her expertise from working on the ground. And we also have Karen Pillar joining us from Team Child. So Joanna, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I'm on my phone in the car. They're doing an earthquake drill where I am. So thanks for having me. Just have a couple of thoughts. One is something that I think Janae mentioned. Definitely get your SHQs in. So when the families have needs and need resources, they're all set. Also, just a reminder for everyone, something that I kept doing was I was sending all my SHQs to Aquanetta, who was my elementary school advocate or liaison, but forgetting to then if there was different kids in different schools who had different liaisons. So just remember to make sure you're sending your SHQs in and sending it to the right liaison to make it easier for them. And also just make sure to connect and problem solve with your liaison. I've had a really great success in just sending in requests, not knowing if they would happen, and then great things getting done. So just for instance, last year during the pandemic, when everything was virtual schooling, I had a family that had 4 children, 3 school-age children, and they had nowhere to put their computers. They were sitting on the floors. It was very awkward. They couldn't get their work done. So McKinney-Vento was able to buy us some desks for the family, and I think they actually ended up buying for 2 different families, which really just made a huge difference in them being able to do their schoolwork. Things like headphones, tech also made a huge difference. I had 3 teenagers in 1 studio apartment, you know, trying to attend class and participate. So working with a liaison on whatever needs they have. Certainly at this point, making sure that kids have the technology in case their class is closed due to COVID outbreaks. I think the schools are mainly taking care of that at this point, but you know, checking in with your families to make sure, and then talking to the liaison if there's any problem. They were really great. I had a student who needed a mouse. They got us mice for that. Some other examples, last year when school went in person for half a day, I had 3 kids who were at a local community center for the full day so their parents could do what they needed to do. And it was close enough to the school that there was no transportation, but they really needed to be in school to help their learning. So again, I think I actually submitted a transportation request knowing it wouldn't happen. And then one of the McKinney-Vento staff came up with this great idea of having an IA walk the kids up to the community center and pay them out of the tutoring funding, I think it was. So just being able to problem solve with your liaison, you can really get a lot of things done. Just some other examples of things to think about. I had a student a few years ago who was in high school and there was a science class field trip to Hawaii. She thought she'd never be able to do it. She was very disappointed. She really wanted to go with her class. She got partial scholarship through the school, and then McKinney-Vento was actually able to cover the rest, and she was able to go on that field trip. So for her to be able to do that and feel like she was part of the class was really amazing. And of course, that all depends on funds, I know, but I'm just saying, always ask. It doesn't hurt to ask. Other things to think about is the tutoring that's available. Potentially, as long as someone in the school is able to provide extra tutoring support to the kids. I've done that a number of times and it's been really great. McKinney-Vento pays for the extra hours and the kid gets more individual support, especially if they've been moving around. Other things that we've worked out with McKinney-Vento is when we've had children who weren't eligible for transportation, but there was a serious safety issue, an abusive person was in the area and it wasn't safe for them to take the metro or walk. We've been able to advocate for that. I know it's super hard right now because of the transportation concerns, but you might even be able to get them on another bus, just at a stop, things like that. So make sure just make sure you're communicating with your liaison. They've been really great. I really appreciate it in problem solving different things that are happening and barriers that are coming up with kids. What else did I want to talk about? Also, another thing that's come up with us, especially this year, is it's been hard to find after school care because a lot of programs are closed. So if you're unable to find an after school care within the transportation boundaries and unable to find a childcare that'll pick up, again, work with your liaison to see if they can encourage transportation to provide that. Of course, explaining that the parent needs to be working or in school and they need this service in order to continue and be stable. I think those are my main things. Just like I said, I ask for anything, and then if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But a lot of times they've been able to problem solve with me, so I really appreciate it. I think that's it. Unless anyone has any questions.
No question, but hey, Joanna.
Hi.
Thank you so much, Joanna. I know that you're in a time crunch, so yeah, if anyone has a question for Joanna specifically, please just raise your hand or you can shout it out. Mike, was this question about IA for Joanna, or could you clarify that?
Yeah, she said an IA came out and helped.
Oh, instructional assistant.
Thank you.
All right, I think that there's no other questions. So thank you so much, Joanna, for your time. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you all. Bye.
And I'd like to introduce Karen from Team Child to share a bit about what Team Child does and how they support students experiencing homelessness. Hi, Karen.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Kayla, for inviting me to join you all. I see a couple familiar names and lots that I don't recognize. So I'll tell you a little bit about Teen Child and then ways we've intersected with young people who are experiencing homelessness and school districts that are supporting them. So Team Child is a civil legal services office. So that basically means civil means we're not criminal defense attorneys. We represent people who are having legal matters in the rest of the world outside of like sort of a criminal defense situation. But we are targeted to serving young people 12 to 24 years old who often are also having criminal involvement or other types of court involvement. So it's pretty common for us to be working with a young person who might have a criminal defense attorney or public defender dealing with a specific charge, but we're also trying to support them in navigating other systems and making sure they understand their rights in other circumstances. And for young people, the three major areas where they actually have pretty strong legal rights that can sometimes be hard to navigate are in the education system. There's a variety of legal rules and structures for students in school, including school discipline cases, special education matters, McKinney-Vento, and other types of enrollment barriers, experiences of bullying and harassment on both sides, whether you're being accused of it or experiencing it. That's a big area. There's a lot of law involved with people going to school. The other big area is students having safe and stable places to live. And for young people, especially before you're 18, a lot of times those legal problems intersect with whether you have adults in your life that are taking care of you, right? So sometimes it's the whole family needing a safe and stable place to live and dealing with issues around that. But for our clientele, sometimes it's like there aren't people around that are supporting them. And there are some rights that young people have, and there are some processes that we can walk them through. So sometimes we're helping them understand CHINs, emancipation, minor guardianship, even knowing how to access DCYF and child welfare if they feel like that's an avenue they want to take. And then the third kind of major area that we see a lot of clients regarding is access to healthcare broadly, mental health care and treatment specifically, and other types of disability related support, right? If you have different levels in need, you might be eligible for different types of services, benefits, and then accessing those can sometimes be a challenge, or you might try to access them and be turned down, right? So those are kind of the major areas that we generally focus on. Team Child provides, this is a free legal service, so we provide that legal advocacy to people in King County, and then we have specific offices in Spokane, Yakima, and Pierce County. We also serve young people who are currently in our state prison system that we call JR, Juvenile Rehabilitation. So those are the young people we have the most access to and have attorneys available to represent them. Some of the King team has popped on to this call, but not everyone is here. But the specific attorneys representing young people in, or staff that are representing and supporting young people in King County, LaKayla Irving and Elisa Kozad are two of our attorneys in King County right now. And Portia Phelps is our legal assistant who supports our clients and families in many ways, but is also often the person you'll talk to if you're making a referral. Anyone can refer a young person to Team Child, but the client is a young person. So if you're referring a young person, it would be great to tell them that you're referring them to an attorney and kind of make sure they're interested in having an attorney. It's awkward to call someone to say you're available to be an attorney and they're like, did I need an attorney? I wasn't sure. So young people themselves can call us, but it's good to engage the person in saying, this is a resource. Do you think you need it? And we try to be incredibly creative and flexible about how we connect with young people, and especially in the last 2 years, but even before that, we were a very mobile, very flexible group of attorneys. So we can meet clients in their homes, in the communities, at schools, in our office, virtually, however they need to connect. We're really designed to try to literally meet young people where they are, because it's a lot to ask someone, oh, you're gonna have to come into my office at 2 o'clock tomorrow, right? It's not really the way we do our business. So keep that in mind. And, we'll try to we have access to language lines to have language access available for people when they need it, and trying to think through the other ways that accessing a lawyer, there's barriers to that we're trying to overcome all the time. We're always open to suggestions about that. So we do come across McKinney-Vento issues pretty frequently. And it sounds like I wasn't listening to the whole morning, but it sounds like a lot of things people are talking about. It's, sometimes we're just chatting through with students and their families, like these kinds of things people are talking about, troubleshooting, how to, ask for help, making sure they're raising issues that they need help with so that the school understands what the situation is, and trying to, make that communication clear. We've had some cases where there has been a real specific question of whether they meet the standard of McKinney-Vento. And I think, for our clientele who are older, a lot of that is around whether they're considered unaccompanied and what that means. Because it's an older young person. That's a lot of times we find clients who just really don't have family around that are supporting them. And so they're trying to access the school system without an adult to help navigate. I will generally say that we have found McKinney-Vento coordinators incredibly helpful and some of the most just supportive people we see in school. So we're really grateful for that. For those of you who are doing that, I have found many of them individually to be just incredibly passionate student advocates. So thank you. And yeah, I'm sure in the last 2 years, the work has just been just much more intense, as it has, I think, for everyone in the community. I'm guessing, but I guess maybe Kayla, if you think it would be helpful, like most people probably have a pretty strong understanding of what the McKinney-Vento rules are. So I can highlight those if you feel like that would be really helpful, but I'm guessing that's not really necessary.
Yeah, we covered those in the beginning.
Yeah,
so.
okay. I maybe just want to highlight some things that I think we're thinking about as lawyers right now around students in school in general. That will impact students in McKinney-Vento, but many other students as well. So let's see, there's 3 that come to mind that I think are really worth just highlighting. So one, we have a lot of students and families who enroll in school who are also new to Seattle or to Washington State and to the United States. And so there's some layers of issues and rights that come up when you are new in school and you're also new in the United States. Like where, making sure there were records that transferred, is it clear what that student needs? Like there's going to be a lot of questions about that and maybe some challenges to really understand, is that student eligible for special education? I mean, they might be, and there might be some hesitancy to look into that because, well, they're new here, their language skills are not that strong in English. I mean, from a legal perspective, those aren't reasons not to assess the need for special education, but it's a dance, right, of truly understanding what a student is presenting with, understanding the history and the story of what, they've had, is education support in the past, or issues that maybe they've gone through that might raise a concern that they'd be eligible for special education. So there's also, wanting to make sure that you're not dismissing a potential enrollment because you think the student is too old, or maybe they've completed the education available to them in the country they're from, but that completion of that level of education doesn't really match what we expect in our state. And so, you have a right in our state to go to school until you've met our standards, or until you're 21. But if you're 19 or 18 and you haven't really met our standards, you still have that access to education. And that, is not crystal clear, right? Coming from different places and having different education systems from other countries might not always be obvious, but not having a mindset that you're assuming that someone shouldn't continue their education here because they're older or because maybe they went as far as they could in the school where they were from, what was available to them. So that's really important to think about. The second thing I would say is that we're thinking a lot about right now, especially as people are physically entering buildings, is we care a lot about making sure students are not pushed back out of the building because of behavior and the way that they're engaging in the building. And We know, I'm sure all of you know, that experiences of trauma and stress can often manifest with behaviors, and we're going to expect to see a lot of that this year. Everyone has been under an immense amount of stress. We would certainly like to support students if they're experiencing a suspension or expulsion. They have specific rights about that, but also just hoping that the systems themselves are really creating a lot of flexibility around student behavior and student need, and not responding from a disciplinary approach, especially now more than ever. But a lot of overlap, I would think, with students who are also experiencing homelessness, additional layers of stress that then can manifest in behaviors at school where they're not at their best and maybe doing things that the school will say is violation of a school rule. It needs to be a suspension. So we're really concerned about that, and we will certainly accept referrals around that, and if there are students experiencing that are over 12. And then lastly, in the special education realm, it's been a real interesting time for the last 2 years to figure out how students were getting the services they needed. And I'm just going to be honest, a lot of students didn't get the services they needed. And I think there's just not a lot of argument about that, whether you were a special education or a regular education. But the thing to keep in mind is that there's a ton of money rolling in from the feds to the state to the districts for what are called recovery services. And every district setting those up differently. It's coming out of like the CARES Act and the funding, like the recovery funding, to send money through OSPI out to the districts to say, we know there's a lot of need out there. We know there's going to be gaps that need to be filled. So here's this extra money, and the districts are setting up recovery services plans, making sure you're asking about that. And, does this kid qualify for recovery services? What are the recovery services in our district? Helping families understand that, because there's enough money out there for a pretty rigorous amount of intervention for a pretty large number of students. So like our hope is that we're not hearing a lot of like, it's not available or we're full. We're hoping we're hearing a lot of like, let's get you connected to recovery services. And because it's really a significant amount of resource coming through, and it's not going to last forever. And I think there's some expectation that it get used actually in a fairly short period of time, the next couple school years. So those, I think, are the three big things we're thinking a lot about. Young people that come from other countries and are new to the United States, students who are coming into school and having behaviors and behaving ways that the school finds concerning or is disruptive in some way, and how we're responding to that. And then how we're supporting and building the bridges of recovery, specifically for students with disabilities, but really for everybody. And I think all those things are going to overlap with your McKinney-Vento experiences with students who are facing a housing instability situation and also trying to get to school on a regular basis. And the whole story of what that might look like for each student coming in. So those, I think, are the things that are high in our mind. So I don't know if there's more questions. Let me see if I can see what's in the chat. I know someone was asking, is it a new federal act? If you're referring to the money, it's just pieces of the money that came out of the CARES Act and I think it's called ARCA, the Recovery Act, or ARPA, I don't know. They have funny acronyms.
There is, so it's the American Rescue Plan. Yep. And I think people have been calling it ARP. I've heard in some different sessions. And specifically, thank you for bringing that in, Karen. There's also part of the ARP dollars is specifically earmarked for students experiencing homelessness. So states are getting more funding to address the needs of these students than ever before. So this is a really great time to make sure you have these partnerships with your McKinney-Vento liaisons to see how you can kind of partner back and forth with these extra dollars coming in.
Thank you so much, Karen. Are there any other questions specifically for Karen? Okay, don't see any raised hands, but thank you again, Karen, for sharing your expertise and for spreading the word about what Team Child does. I worked with Team Child quite a bit back at the shelter, and it was always such a relief to have someone on the phone who knows the law in and out and can really advocate for students. So thank you for all your important work. I wanted to open up the floor just for general Q&A. If anyone has a case that they have, or like a student they're working with that they are having difficulty accessing services for, you can use this space to kind of problem solve about that. Or if there's any questions just in general, please feel free to speak up or write it in the chat.
I have something. I don't know if there's Team Child, they're the attorneys. So my suggestion is future federal legislation or state legislation, if we had something that would that acknowledged youth suicide, because there's been a lot, and setting aside funding for families that are left after something like that could help fund moving, because that can add double trauma on top of having to stay in the same home. So my suggestion would be to some attorneys or legislators, maybe addressing that, because then if there's an act or something that's there, housing can then set aside the funding and for anybody that goes through that. But it just seems like there should be something that but there really isn't yet, because you have that double trauma happening, and that can really hurt kids and their future as well as the families. And I think we just had the new state, the National Suicide Prevention Month or whatever. So that was my suggestion to attorneys or whoever that might want to tackle that. But I know housing could then set aside funding to cover people that live in housing or don't, but it has to have that little thing before. So I don't know if you guys are connected to people like that, but that was my suggestion.
Thank you for that, Samantha. I know that we've seen, as you mentioned, like during the pandemic, then we've seen youth suicide rates skyrocket, and it's such a huge issue, and yeah, that there aren't that many resources for. So that's a good point. Hopefully sometime in the future, we can have more services set aside for that specific experience. Thank you. Were there any other general questions or folks that wanted to share about a situation that they're working through with students or families?
Looks like we just got a couple of questions in the chat. So one is how to find the contact information of each McKinney-Vento liaison at different schools and districts. I believe there is a link somewhere that we can pop in the chat that should have most of that contact info. So Maret or Sammy or Kayla, I don't remember where that link went, but I know we had it somewhere. Perfect for this. And then also, is it more difficult to coordinate transportation if a child lives in King County and wants to attend their school of origin in Pierce County? I'll let some of my other experts chime in there.
I can answer that if you want. We definitely have students that moved into Pierce County, and they're still going to school at Tukwila, and it isn't any more difficult to transport them.
I actually would just chime in to share something that Kayla had talked about when you have to consider, is it in the best interest of the child? King County is very wide, and Tukwila to Tacoma may not be that far, but Enumclaw, North Seattle, you have to think about traffic and time. Are they commuting 2 hours to get to school? Are they sleeping? How is their behavior once they get to school? There are some things to take into consideration. So I don't think that's a yes, no question. That's really looking at the map, looking at the commute time, looking at the age and demographic and the services that they're receiving. There have been times where we've looked into, so I used to work for Seattle Public Schools and a couple other school districts, and we would see that maybe the district that they live in had better or more services that child needs than we were providing them at the current time. So it's just really you building a relationship and a rapport with your other colleagues in those other districts or those counties and seeing what makes sense. But usually that best interest determination is after a couple observations and checking in with the school and school building and checking in with the parent. Do you want a kid to wake up at 5:30 in the morning, to get to school by 8 and have breakfast and all these things? Yes, the continuity is nice, but the behavior and the academics and just some other things to take into consideration. So that is not a yes, no question. That could be a yes, but observation and other things may be taken into consideration.
Thank you for that, Marit. I also wanted to just lift up what was asked in the chat about the need for expanding funding for undocumented workers to access McKinney-Vento services. And they can access McKinney-Vento services now. There's no citizenship status check or anything when you get qualified for McKinney-Vento services. And so I would just encourage anyone in that situation to reach out to your local liaison, and they can access services immediately, regardless of citizenship status.
All right, so I'm gonna be mindful of our time here. We have about a minute left, so we're gonna do just a really quick wrap up in the Mentimeter. If I can figure out how to go to the next question, which I guess is harder when I'm actually on screen than I thought. So maybe we're not gonna do that because we are just about at time. Oh, actually, here we go. Maret can click it. I'm gonna hit stop share on my screen so I can actually maneuver this screen a little bit better. So if you click that link from Maret, that'll take you to the Mentimeter. We just want to hear about what your biggest takeaway from today's training was. And we can kind of have this flowing as you sign out. And I know Sarah also had an evaluation from Skitch that will be sent out and in the chat that we would love everyone to fill out as we close out today. So this should work now. Does everyone see the Mentimeter? Sweet. All right, so as we're rolling out, we'd love to hear what people's biggest takeaways from today's training are. And thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna pass it off to Sarah as this kind of rolls on the screen.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. Anyone that's registered for this training will get a follow-up email that has all of the slides and any resources and contact information that was put into the chat, along with a survey that we will send out as part of that, asking for feedback and what was most helpful. Thank you so much, Building Changes and our liaisons and Team Child and Joanna from Solid Ground. Thank you all. It was really great workshop today. Thanks.
All right, I think I'm gonna leave the Mentimeter up for another like 30 seconds and I'll close it down, give folks a second there. But just wanted to, Sarah, thank you for including us and inviting us to give this training again today.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you, guys.
feel like I want some background music, you know?
I know I have to figure out how to do the background music thing for the waiting when you're waiting too.
All right, I think I'm gonna stop this here. And looks like Sammy is still here, but I think Sammy, Maret, and I need to jump to a staff meeting.
Okay,
So
great.
thank you so much.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.